Okay, so in this movie, I want to focus on a very specific setting that applies to working with charts and graphs inside of Illustrator, and that's defining the scale for the value axis. So let's actually start by creating a brand new document here. Command N for new document. I use letter set to inches and again wide here just to make it easy to format to the screen. And I'm going to go ahead now and create a chart. Let's go over here to select the column graph tool. And I'm simply going to go ahead now and just click anywhere on the screen here. And let's actually set a width of 2 inches and a height of 2 inches. And then I'm going to click OK. So really kind of a small chart here. But remember that the actual bounding area that I define for my chart refers to where those values are actually plotted. It doesn't include the value axis, the category axis, or the legend, so on and so forth. But I'm just going to punch in some pretty simple numbers right here. Maybe we'll do something like 10, tab, 30, and then let's go down to 20, then let's go to 50, then let's go to 40, and then let's go to 100. So I'm just going to resize this graph window a little bit so you can see the values that we're dealing with here. Pretty straightforward. I'm actually going to get rid of the decimals here, so let's click on this button for cell style, change the number of decimal digits to 0, click OK. So I'm basically working with very simple numbers here, 10, 30, 20, 50, 40, and 100. And now I'm going to go ahead and click to apply those. Now I actually want to see this chart formatted as a line chart, not as a column chart. So let me close the data window here, go to the object menu, choose graph, choose type, and change it to a line chart. Now I'm going to click OK. Now because of the way that I've currently formatted the data here, it's showing the series in this visualization format, but I really want to see it charted as a line. So let's switch back here to my regular selection tool, choose Object, Graph, Data, transpose my data, and choose to apply it. And now I see this plotted as a line on my chart. Let me actually move this over here to the side, and I'll zoom in just a little bit here. Let me close the window. Let's choose Save to make sure that the data gets applied correctly. And let me zoom in a little bit closer here on this chart. So it's pretty straightforward here. I have things that currently go from 0% to 100%, and that's because of some of the settings that I already have, which have been assigned to this chart. So let's change some of its settings. Let's go to the Object menu. Let's choose Graph, and then I'm going to choose Type. And then at the top here where it says Graph Options, I'm going to choose Value Axis. You can see that over here I have a suffix, which is the %sign. Let's actually delete that. And we'll actually leave the tick marks set to full width, because that lets us actually see where these values are actually being plotted. If we click OK for a moment here, I can now see the values that appear along the value axis. It goes from 0 all the way to 100, and Illustrator breaks it down into 6 steps. So basically I see it in increments of 20. Now I didn't specify that. That's something that Illustrator just chose on its own based on the numbers that I'm currently using in my chart. So let me explain. Let's kind of move this over to the side just a little bit here. And let's go back to the data of my chart. I'm going to go to Object, Graph, Data. So I have here this window. And I currently have values that go from 10 to 30 to 20 to 50 to 40, 100. And that's basically what I'm seeing here. 10 up to 30, back down to 20, up to 50, down to 40, and then all the way up to 100. So Illustrator has seen all those values and has decided to break it up into 6 parts, starting at 0 and then going all the way to 100. But if I were to say, you know what, maybe the top value is not 100, but the top value is maybe 150, I'll hit the Tab key to accept that value right over here. And then if I choose to apply that, you can see that Illustrator now has adjusted the values in the value axis. My chart itself has stayed in a 2-inch by 2-inch square, but Illustrator has changed what those numbers actually represent. It did so because it needed to keep this number here within the bounds of my chart. So basically everything had to kind of be squeezed within that specific area. Let's change this back to 100 for a moment here. Highlight the field, type in 100 and hit Tab, and then choose to apply that value. You can now see that Illustrator updated this. Let's say I want this value to actually extend beyond the edge of this chart. What I can do is I can specify exactly how Illustrator should determine what these values are. So for example, if this number here were 125, I'll hit the Tab key and apply that value. But I still want the values to be from 0 to 100. What I'm going to do now is close the data window, go to Object, Graph, and then Type, I'm going to switch over here from graph options to value axis so that now I can focus on changing these settings. And I'm going to override the calculated values. You see, Illustrator determined what these are by itself, but I'm now going to override that. I want the minimum value to stay at 0, so I want the chart to represent 0 here at the bottom. But the maximum should be 100, not 150. And maybe I only want there to be 4 divisions, so like every 25, it should create another tick mark. So I'm going to type in 4 divisions. Now when I click OK, watch what happens. Remember that I defined my chart to only be 2 inches by 2 inches square, and that's what this point to this point represents. Within those 2 inches, I've now specified how Illustrator should calculate those values. I want it to be split into 4 parts, and I want it to go from 0 to 100. Now this data point, which happened to have been 125, obviously exceeds the bounds that I've already defined for that chart, which is why this data point goes outside of that area. So I have the ability to control the scale that each of my charts are using. Now I can go both ways here as well. For example, maybe I want my chart to start over here at 25, and I only want it to represent from 25 to 100. So let's go back to the object menu, choose Graph, and then Type. Let's view the value axis options and set my minimum value for 25. I still want there to be 4 divisions. Actually, now that I think of it, let's make it 3 divisions. Click OK. And now you can see that my chart starts plotting things down here outside the bounds of that graph, because within the bounds of the graph only represent values that start at 25 and go to 100. This is very helpful when you're actually plotting multiple charts and you're placing them against each other, and you want the scale to be the same. So in this way, you control exactly what the scale is, how many different subdivisions and the tick marks there are, and when you plot the data, it'll always be true and representative when you're comparing multiple data points. So remember, if you don't specify exactly what that scale represents, Illustrator will just kind of figure it out on its own. But if you have very specific needs for your chart, remember to go into the Graph Type Options dialog box and modify the tick values using a minimum, a maximum value, and how many divisions you want it to have.